Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another restful episode of true, scary stories to help you fall asleep. Today, we're going to be reading true vacation and travel horror stories. I hope you enjoy them. But before we get into the stories, I want to thank the sponsor of today's video, Aura Health. My life is super hectic. I'm a father of 3, a husband, and I run 2 YouTube channels. Needless to say, I stay very busy. And when you've got so much going on at the same time, and you're always worried about not having enough time to get it all done, it can lead to a lot of burnout. I'm going to be honest with everyone here, I've been struggling with burnout a lot lately. But I discovered the Dealing with Burnout series on the Aura Health app. Let me tell you, it's been a lifesaver. The guided meditations and exercises in this series have been helping me cope with stress and find much needed balance in my life. But that's not all. One thing that helps set Aura apart is the level of personalization that it offers. You can fully customize your experience right down to the background noise. I love that I can pick the sounds that I want to play and adjust the volume of those sounds to my liking. It makes my mindfulness sessions so much more immersive and enjoyable. I can choose between music, home noises, or rain or nature noises, and I can adjust the volume of all of them. You know, I've tried other wellness apps before, but Aura is truly unique. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach like some others out there. With Aura, there's an incredible variety of meditations and practices to choose from. Honestly, it's like the app knows me better than I know myself sometimes. It's recommended guides that resonate with my preferences, and I can explore endless tracks that I absolutely love. Another aspect that blew me away is the diverse community of coaches, therapists, and storytellers on Aura. There are hundreds of them. So finding someone who truly connects with you and understands your needs becomes so much easier. It's like having a personal wellness team right in your pocket. Now, I know that you're all eager to experience the magic of the Aura Health app for yourself. So here's a special treat. You can try out the app with an exclusive discount. Just head over to aurahealth.io/innerscare to try Aura Health and save 25%. Also linked in the description down below and in the pinned comment. Don't wait any longer. Invest in your well-being and explore the incredible world of personalization, variety, and mindfulness with the Aura Health app. Also, I would like to thank Mr. Sandman for joining me in this video and reading the first story. The link to his channel will also be in the description down below. And for now, without any further ado, lay back, relax, and enjoy these true, scary stories.
I was leaving from PH, Hungary, to Zurich, catching a flight there back to Boston via JFK in New York City. To get to Zurich, I needed to take a 5-hour bus ride to Budapest, take the subway a few stops until I reached the main rail station. I was tired, hungry, thirsty, and really had to use the bathroom by the time I got to Budapest. I decided to carry on and hold it until I got to the main railway station. I make it there just in the nick of time. Something about holding it in for that long really exhausted me, and I just wanted to get off the train and sleep. After waiting 2 hours, my train arrived, and I found my cabin. There were 2 portly Hungarian girls already in there, watching movies on their laptop, and they seemed very friendly and easygoing. I mingled a little to be friendly, but really just wanted to sleep. Then arrived disaster. These 2 Roma girls literally fell into our cabin, laughing their heads off, and blasting dance music on their Nokias. They were blasting 2 different songs on 2 different Nokias. Now I ride the subway every day in Boston, so I'm used to pricks who don't know how to use headphones, so I didn't think too much of it. They didn't speak a lick of English, but I guess really took a liking to me since every time I closed my eyes I would get poked in the side of the head and giggled at like I was an animal. They really wanted to talk to me through the other Hungarian girls, asking if I had a girlfriend, where I was from, occasionally breaking out a few lines of broken English themselves, like, "handsome boy," while petting my head. I believe in personal space, but I also know trying to argue with them would probably be futile. After a while, I fell into one of my books, realizing I would soon get no sleep. I don't know at what point this happened, but somebody broke out a porno and put it on the Hungarian Girls laptop. I would get poked, shown the porno, and laughed at. Now I'm no slouch. When it comes time to get nasty, I get nasty. But this was not the time for this. I was not attracted to these girls. They smelled like a hockey player's foot, and I was going on 24 hours with no sleep. Plus I had just left my girlfriend in PH, and I was, and still am in love. I wasn't going to screw around. Finally, one of them puts her hand on my junk, bites my ear and asks me, "You want to make love with me?" To which I replied, "Name," taking her hand out of my lap. I then got a barrage of Shekfe from the two Roma. I spent the next 6 hours with these girls blasting music, poking me, berating me, and holding in a pee for fear of them rifling through my stuff. I guess I'm kind of a pushover in these situations. I didn't want to overreact or lose my head. I just wanted the train ride to end without getting stabbed or assaulted by two girls. I guess karma shifted my way in the long run. When we hit the Switzerland border, the girls were detained by Border Patrol, probably for being Roma. That sucks and everything. I know that the Roma people had a bad rap in Europe, but I hated these girls at this point. I hated them so hard. I got a good 1 hour of drifting in and out of naps, but I still felt like crap when we pulled into the Zurich train station. More good news when I arrived at the Zurich airport. I found out they overbooked the flight, and I had been bumped up to first class. I went from sharing a cramped quarter with two Roma snookies to having a chair that turned into a bed, unlimited wine, and a 4-course meal.
In the Greek islands, our taxi driver accused us of putting a dent in the side of his cab after we gave the roof a tap to let him know that we were all out of the car. Next thing I know, he has my friend by the throat. All of the iOS locals come running out and pin us all against the wall until the cops rock up. Two guys in no uniform, and chuck both of my friends in the car without asking any questions. I run to the police station, a dingy little shack with no sign or anything, to find out that both of my mates attempted to run away because they didn't believe that these men were police. They asked for ID but were told to be quiet. They caught one of them and the other got away. As a result, the one who got caught was beaten up and chucked in a cell. Cue me. I rock up to the station to find none of these cops can barely speak English. The taxi driver is there going crazy, talking in Greek to these cops and pointing at me and then his car. I know what he's telling them. I try to act out what happened by pointing to the dent in the back, shaking my head, then miming tapping on the roof. They grab me and take me off the premises. As I wait out on the road, a friend of the taxi driver tries to fight me. I hold him away and say no. One of the cops comes out the front and sees us, and thankfully this guy backs off. Eventually they get this young cop, the only one who can speak English, to tell me they won't talk to me until I bring my other mate back to the police station. This guy was reasonable. I later found out that he was the one who stopped the other cops from beating my friend in the cell to a pulp. He told me as soon as I bring the other guy back, we can sort this all out. I run back to the hotel, grab my friend. Thankfully he was there, and we headed back. Anyway, long story short, they were saying that we could either pay the taxi driver the damages worth 200 euros, or my friends would get taken to another island and put on trial. It was complete bullcrap. I knew it. But we had to leave at 11 a.m. the next day, and it was already 4 a.m. I had enough. I just agreed to pay the money to the crooked taxi driver. Really bad way to end what was such a great trip to Europe. But all was well in the end. We split the fine, and I got my friends out slightly in one piece. I bet the cops and the taxi driver split the cash too. I was driving from Jerusalem to Amman. It's really not that far and much faster/easier than flying. Just take an Israeli taxi to the King Hussein Bridge cross and take a Jordanian taxi from there, all for much less than a much slower sur trip would be. I was already in a bad mood because just prior to leaving Jerusalem, I bought a ticket to walk around the tops of the old city walls. One last tourist thing. I caught up with a group of Russian tourists and walked with them. I speak Russian and they were pretty fun, including one who took his shirt off, joking with me about being attractive to the ladies. Full disclosure, I'm a female writing this. As we passed above the Arab quarter, these cute kids right below us shouted up hello. When we answered in English, they threw rocks at us and hit one guy in the neck. They were throwing up. It didn't hurt too much, but speaking English and going shirtless was enough to get pelted, and it was upsetting. Everyone had been so nice to me up until then. So I was already in a bad mood when I caught a cab. Things started to get better when my nice Palestinian taxi driver told me lots of funny Palestinian jokes as we drove along. Then we were stopped at one checkpoint on the highway, but it looked like it would be a quick stop until I presented my passport. I'm a dual US/EU citizen and was using my US passport in Israel because I was told that border control would stamp a card instead of the actual passport for United States citizens so that I could later travel to Arab countries that won't allow people who visit Israel to enter. The Israeli soldiers, police, saw my US passport and smiled at me. Then they opened it, saw place of birth, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and their faces fell. They went from seeing me as a friend to looking hurt that I was an enemy without my opening my mouth. Then the search took a little longer. When we got to the bridge, we were too late. It closed 10 minutes before, to reopen the next morning. The border guards told us of another town a few kilometers down the road, so we tried to find it. We got lost. Very lost. It was dark. There were very few lights, no signs, and my driver had never been there before. We finally found a middle-aged Orthodox Jewish man walking by, so my driver asked him in Hebrew where the bridge was. He gave directions, but the driver said that he suspected the guy deliberately gave us the wrong directions to mess with him because he's Palestinian. I dismissed this as paranoia until we ran into two secular-looking Israeli girls a few minutes later who gave us the correct directions, very contrary to the ones the Orthodox guy gave us. We found the bridge, paid my driver, and entered the border crossing office on foot. That was okay, but finding the bus that actually crossed the bridge was a bit hard in the dark. When the near-empty bus stopped on the Jordanian side, everyone but me had someone to pick with them. I walked the 200 meters or so to the taxi stand, easy to find as the one light in the distance, where I signed a book with my information, passport number, taxi driver's name and license, etc. This seemed like a safe system, and I got in the front seat of the rickety cab with confidence. As we drove along the highway, we chatted a little and everything seemed fine. All of a sudden, the driver pulled onto a dark, unlit road leading into the mountains, running to the left of the highway. I immediately protested and insisted on returning to the main road. The driver told me that the mountain road was a shortcut, but I said I'd pay the metered fare for the longer main road that went through towns. He went back to the highway and then creeped me out even further by asking me if I had anyone waiting for me in Amman. I lied and said yes. My husband flew in from Dubai earlier that day, and he was already at the hotel. Shortly after that, his wife called him on his cell phone, and he had me talk to her to vouch for his whereabouts. When we got to Amman and found the hotel, we couldn't find the entrance. I wanted out of that cab so badly, I said it was fine. I paid and got out. It was late at night, without a person on the street, and I had to walk around a scary block to find the front of the hotel. Well lit, with a lot of full cars and smiling doormen. I've never been so glad to see a meridian in my life. I took the last train from Vienna to Bratislava in the middle of the night in order to get to the airport early in the morning. I was the only one on the train other than the conductor, engineer, whatever. The train slowly came to a halt, a little after the Slovakian border in the middle of the countryside on a dark platform, and the dude told me to get out. Confused and scared, I did so, and the train left. I had about 2 minutes of utter panic before another guy came around the corner and directed me to the correct train, which started up just then. I hadn't known that I was supposed to transfer. I arrived in Bratislava about 1:30 a.m. I disembarked and made my way through the tunnel under the tracks to come up inside the train station. The entire place was deserted. The lights were off and I could hear dripping water echoing through the building. I could see a circular drive outside with a few taxis waiting and a 24-hour snack stand. So I decided to wait outside until the first buses began running and I could catch the correct one to the airport. However, the doors were locked. I couldn't get out. As I was trying all the doors to find an open one, a woman with wild eyes and wild hair appeared from outside and began hurling herself bodily at the glass doors, yelling and trying to get inside the station. I skedaddled off to a deserted corner and sat down and cried a little bit because I was tired and scared. I realized that if any other person came into the station from the platforms, I was trapped and had no way to escape. Eventually, I steeled myself and went back out onto the platform. I ended up clambering over the train tracks and walking alongside them for a very long time until the fence ended, where I came into a residential neighborhood. Luckily, I came across a policeman who directed me back towards the station. I sat on a bench outside near the snack stand until morning came. And then there was no sign of the woman with the crazy eyes. My girlfriend and I backpacked Croatia last summer. We arrived at Split and eventually found our accommodation after having a rest from the midday heat. We decided to head out into town and see what was what. The first thing we noticed was armed police on every corner, fully tooled up with machine guns, dogs, body armor. And we were like, oh, maybe that's how they do it over here, having known that they had had some rough football fans over the years. We carry on exploring the old town and eventually decide to head home, only to be told by a huge policeman, not that way, which was the only way we knew back to our accommodation. We turned around and tried to get out of the other end of the street, and were met with a similar response in less English. All the while, the streets were filling up with more and more Croats. So, we wound our way through a maze of old town streets, around Diocletian's palace. The whole time, we could hear extremely loud bangs and explosions, and the odd screaming, shouting, and chanting. Obviously, this was quite scary, as we didn't know where we were, and it was our first day there. We ended up coming out on the main strip by the sea, where there were literally about 3,000 people on either side of the street behind barriers, who were all shouting as well, and there was smoke coming down from the street. We turned back to the maze of alleys, and were met by hundreds of people running past us, and screaming, and the acrid smell of CS gas. We went back to the front to try and avoid choking out and being separated. When we got back to the front, we found out that it was a gay pride parade of about 30 to 50 people, marching due to the police killing an LGBTQ member a few weeks earlier. Due to this, the whole city had come out to heckle and attack them, thousands against only a few. It was one of the most eye-opening and terrifying experiences I've ever witnessed. Children, women, and terrifying men hurling abuse and rocks at people. The first time I crossed the border from Laos to Vietnam, I took a bus from Viet Nay to Hanoi. We left at 6 p.m. one night. All of us were tourists, and there were 3 drivers. For the duration of the journey to the border, they played incredibly loud and annoying Laotian music, complete with whiny female singing and twanging, out-of-tune guitars. Now, I love everything from free jazz to gamelan, to Malian kora to Indian sitar, but Southeast Asian pop music is unspeakably awful. We eventually arrived near a border crossing around 1 a.m. and stopped. Except, we didn't know it was a border crossing. We couldn't see any buildings or hear any cars. It felt like we were going to be robbed and left in the middle of nowhere. The drivers turned off the lights and went to sleep on the floor of the bus. They left the music on, extraordinarily loud. When someone asked them to turn it down, they turned it up and laughed. One of the drivers started to touch a girl's leg. Her boyfriend was next to her. The boyfriend was massive, but she was afraid to wake him up in case he started a fight and everything broke loose. After several hours of hell with sobbing girls and people desperate to sleep, not to mention confused and a little scared about what was going on, we left for the 5-minute journey to the border around 6 a.m. When we got to the border, we had to queue for ages in a dirty room. Sheets of rain fell on what felt like a very high crossing. We were treated like cattle and then had to pay $1 to get our passports back, despite already having paid $55 for visas before leaving Laos. The border police slept in the filthiest hovels you can imagine. The walls were black with damp. There were pools of dark water in the rooms and filthy sheets on the beds. We arrived late that same day in Hanoi, exhausted, filthy, suspicious of everyone, and emotionally drained. The first thing I did when I arrived at my guest house was to order a beer. To this day, that ice-cold Tiger beer is the best I've ever had. The funny thing is, though, I went back to Southeast Asia the next year and did the exact same bus trip. Being able to tell other backpackers why we were stopping at 1 a.m. and not having to listen to music as we slept actually made it tolerable. Though, I'll never do it again. I was semi-mugged in New York. I say semi-mugged because the guy didn't have a weapon. He just used words to take our money. It was late at night. My friend and I were drunk and hungry, so we went to McDonald's in Times Square. Sketchy Dude is just loitering around in there, not eating or anything. Sketchy Dude comes up to us continually saying, "Here, take this," while trying to shove something in our hands. I just ignore him completely, but my friend falls into the trap of actually engaging the guy by saying no. After a while, my friend gives in and takes the package. Now, the Sketchy Dude is telling us that the package is drugs. Strange, because normally you would be more specific, and we have to pay him for it or we'll get messed up. Sketchy Dude also claims that the other guy standing around in the McDonald's is with him, and that they're going to both bash us if we don't pay up. Of course, Sketchy Dude refuses to take the package back instead of payment. Sketchy Dude and other guy are bigger than us, and we're drunk, so I knew that we'd have no chance if things turned violent. We wouldn't even be able to run away fast enough if we tried. At first, I offer Sketchy Dude 5 British pounds, telling him that it's worth much more than a US dollar. He wouldn't take it, so I hand over $20 to Sketchy Dude. While all this is going on, I'm looking over to the staff, trying to point out that we need help, without saying anything to provoke Sketchy Dude. But they either didn't understand or didn't want to get involved, maybe assuming that we were actually wanting to buy drugs. Now, Sketchy Dude is saying that he wants more money, so I give him a bit of talking to, saying that he's done very well and that I'll give him another $20, but then that'll be the end of it and he has to leave. He agrees and sticks to the deal. I give him a second $20 bill, then he runs out. The other guy doesn't leave or even pay any attention to the rest of us. So as it turns out, that was crap, and they didn't even know each other. My friend puts the package in his pocket and we go upstairs to eat. Knowing America's war on drugs and high incarceration rate, I'm still scared more about getting done for possession than I was about Sketchy Dude messing us up. My friend goes into the toilets to inspect the package, which is rolled up in a paper napkin. Luckily, it turns out just to be more napkins rolled up inside, nothing more. So, the lesson of the day is don't just say no to drugs or random sketchy dudes, as that makes them engage and lock onto you rather than moving on to someone else. Always better to just pretend that you can't hear or see them at all. I've fallen into the trap a couple of times myself with hobos wanting to fight me for saying no, when I should have just ignored them completely. So in the end, all good. No one got hurt, and I paid $40 for a travel story to tell my friends and you guys. I was overlanding through Africa, and the group had stopped in Harare, Zimbabwe for the afternoon. Several of us had visited the National Art Gallery and split up afterwards. I was wandering back to the truck with one other guy, and we were doing the usual touristy thing of taking pictures of the city. It so happened that the trees which lined some of the streets were all out in full purple bloom, so there were some good photo opportunities. We took a few photos, and I was taking one last one when my mate, let's call him Mr. Tall, turned around to me and said, "I think we need to go over there and speak to that guy." To which I replied, "Why?" half expecting another person trying to sell us something. Mr. Tall then said, "Well, he's the one with the rifle." This then made me overthink everything that I'd done in the last few hours as we crossed over the road to the guard. There was nothing I'd done that was illegal to my knowledge. So what's this all about? We reach the guard and he begins to ask us why we're taking photos of the street. My friend does the talking to start with, telling the guy holding the AK that we're just tourists and that we've come here to see the beautiful city. This, however, does not go down particularly well, and the guard isn't satisfied with our answers. And when we try to start walking away, he points the AK at us, and again, we tell him that we're only tourists. He's still not satisfied with our answers, and tells us that we have to come with him. This throws us a little, as we're not sure where he wants to take us, and he motions over another guard. I'm still supporting the tourist comments made by Mr. Tall, and glancing around at the same time to see if I can see any other members of our group, or the group leaders, etc. It's at this point that I see little notices on the wall of the building we're next to, and it says that you're not allowed to take pictures, use your phone to call or receive calls, or even hang around the area. So, unsurprisingly, I begin to wonder what's associated with this building. We again tell the guard that we do not want to come with him and that we're only tourists. He then unclicks the safety of his AK, and it's at this moment, pointing at my gut. I'm standing there thinking, if he has a negligent discharge, then I'm going to have a hole in my lower back the size of my fist, and the round may hit my spine, and either way, that'll be the end of me. We relent after asking why we were going many times, and stopped and starting, and walk into the large parking lot area behind the building, and walk towards the small guard's office at the rear of the building. A larger, bigger guard steps out after the first guard goes in, and explains the situation. The second guard still watches us the whole time. Essentially, we can't sneak away, and the car park is too open anyway. We have another conversation with the guy who's slightly higher up the chain of command, and we again explain that we're just tourists. At this moment in time, I'm also thinking that we may end up losing our cameras, or having to pay a large fine or bribe, or both, and/or end up being detained. I didn't particularly like the thought of a Zimbabwean jail. It turned out that we'd inadvertently taken pictures of the president's office. Luckily, though, we managed to reason with the third guard and delete the pictures we'd taken. This seemed to satisfy him, which meant by the chain of command, the first and second guards would be satisfied too. We then turned sharply away from the small guard's house, walked quickly out of the compound, round the barrier, and off out into the city. The face of another guard when we walked past him, because we walked in one way and out a different way, was particularly memorable, as he just watches two white tourist-looking people walk out of the back of the president's office building. Lesson learned: be careful of where you take photos, as you might not know what you're inadvertently taking pictures of. I was 11 years old when we went to Slovakia with the whole family, and it was pretty much like any big city holiday, and therefore completely boring and uninteresting for an 11-year-old boy. So, one evening when we get back to the hotel, I wanted to see if they had any sort of cool features like an arcade room or anything else than spending time with my family talking about all the boring churches and museums and whatnot. So I went into an elevator and pressed for the lobby, and absolutely nothing happened. I figured the thing might be broken, so I just pressed to open the doors, and again nothing happened. I was slightly afraid, because now I was thinking of being stuck inside of an elevator. So I knocked a couple of times on the door, which in hindsight was a bad idea, because after I knocked on the elevator door, the elevator started falling down. Not in a free fall, luckily, but definitely faster than an elevator is supposed to go. A few seconds later, it hit the ground and stopped with a bang followed by a ding, and the door opened and let me into a small, completely dark room, only lit up by the lights from inside the elevator. And then there was a locked door. The only thing I could make the elevator do now was open and close the door. So I sat in there, waiting for someone to rescue me while I went through the 5 stages of grief in perfect order. At first, I didn't believe it was real. It must have been some sort of mistake, and soon someone would open the locked door and find me. Then I got really angry, because I was just trying to find something to do, and then I had to get trapped in a stupid elevator. Bargaining is pretty hard when you're alone, but I figured it was as good a time as any to start hoping for some divine intervention. And afterwards, I just cried until I accepted my fate and peed in the elevator as a sort of screw you to the hotel when they would find my body, so somebody would have to clean that up too. A while later though, I heard something that sounded like footsteps for me to shout for help at it. Apparently, it noticed because they stopped and then moved a little closer to the elevator shaft. It came from a couple floors up, and I shouted help again and again until the elevator suddenly said ding and started moving up and opening the door on the very floor I had left it. And there stood nobody other than my own big brother who had gone out to look for me because I had been away for over an hour when he had heard me call for help and called the elevator. Back when I was in middle school, my family was in Spain. We had booked a hotel in advance, and when we finally got there, it turned out the parking was a ways from the hotel. So we unloaded all of our stuff, and then a hotel person was to come with us to help us find the parking space. My mom and brother were feeling bad, so they went up to the room immediately. Unfortunately, my mom was the only one in our family who spoke Spanish, and of course, the hotel gave us the only guy in management that didn't speak English. But we figured, how hard could it be to find a parking spot? The guy could point and say a key, and we could figure it out. Well, we ended up driving for ages, throughout all of these little dark, windy roads, until we finally get to this gated off area. It took the man a while to unlock it, and then we went inside. It was one of those underground parking lots, and even though it was the middle of the day, it was pretty much pitch black down there, and hard to see the individual parking spaces. The guy hops out of the passenger seat. I was sitting in the back and my dad was driving. Turns on his flashlight and starts beckoning us to where to go. My dad can't really see anything except for this guy, so he just blindly follows him. The beckoning gets quicker, so thinking we had a large distance still to go, my dad speeds up. Crash. He hits a huge metal pole that was right in front of him. He jumps out of the car and starts yelling at the guy, who just shrugs because he didn't understand English. There's a pretty big dent in the front of the car. The guy doesn't care. He hands us the keys to close the gate to the parking garage and walks off, leaving my dad and I to find our way back ourselves. When we get back to the hotel, the management doesn't even care, even when my dad wakes up my mom and makes her yell at them in Spanish. My mom wants to inspect the damage, but my dad is done with this parking garage. So that left me, a directionally challenged 12-year-old, to try and guide my mom back to the 2+ miles again. We got lost several times. The only good thing was that the rental car company only charged us about the equivalent of $300 for the damage. which was a lot better than we would have paid back at home for it. I was in Paris on Easter Sunday with my boyfriend, and since nothing is open on Easter, we decided to walk along the Seine to the Eiffel Tower and enjoy the nice weather. We were in Javel, which seemed to be an okay part of town, but it was very residential and very empty given the holiday. As we were walking toward the river, we encountered this man talking loudly/angrily in French and walking down the middle of the street. At first, I just thought that he was drunk and arguing with someone on the phone, but as he got closer, I realized he wasn't holding a phone, just talking to himself. He stares at us. We walk by and he keeps talking, and I sort of glanced up and look at him. Bad idea. He started following us down the street, exclaiming what I assumed were obscenities from his tone. Neither of us spoke French. This guy was big as well, larger than my boyfriend who's 6'4". We kept our heads down, ignored him and walked away quickly trying to shake him off, making random turns, until we finally ran into 3 other people. We engaged with them and they spoke French, and as we turned the corner, we heard shouting, but we figured we were done with the situation. At this point, we were at the river, so we walked down towards the tower, and not 10 minutes later we encountered the same guy again walking towards us. I have no idea how he got ahead of us so quickly, but he was yelling at us again as he approached. We ducked into the lobby of a nearby hotel, and he didn't follow us in, but did hover outside for a while. We waited a few minutes and he eventually left. We just went home after that. Couldn't take any more crazy. There was also the time that I got flashed in Barcelona, but that is a different story. I was traveling in South America by myself as a 22-year-old woman. I arrived in Santiago Chile by bus really late at night, like around 10 p.m. Shortly after I got off the bus, a guy comes up to me from the general area of the taxi stand and asks if I need a cab, and I say yes. We start walking to his cab and it's really far away, like at least 5 blocks. I start to feel kind of uneasy, but I'm also in the middle of this big unfamiliar city and just try to reassure myself that it's fine. I double check his cab has all the normal brand markings when we finally get to it, and I sit up front with my bag, more out of habit. It's common to do this in Ubers in South America. I give him the address of the hostel I booked and we make small talk in Spanish for the first few minutes of the ride. And then there's a bit of a natural pause, which he breaks by looking over at me and saying very calmly, "Are you scared?" Of course, that really freaked me out, but I tried to seem calm. I just laughed a bit and was like, "No, I'm good, just tired and it's late." And he goes, "Well, you seemed pretty scared back there when we were walking. You know, there's a lot of bad people around here. Sometimes they pretend to be taxis. You never know who to trust. I've heard a lot of women being sold after taking a bad taxi. Are you traveling here alone?" This is while we're still driving through the middle of the city. It's dark and it's late, and I'm now painfully aware literally no one knows where I am. I was going to message my family with an update when I got to the hostel. They don't know I'm in Santiago. They think I'm still on the coast. Of course, I don't say that and tell them that I'm always very careful, and actually my group of friends know I'm on the way and are waiting for me at the hostel. I see a stoplight coming up and was literally thinking that as soon as the car slowed down, I was going to make a break for it and just jump out of the car. Probably the most scared I've ever been in my entire life. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I see this guy reaching down for something under his seat, and my brain is just going, gun. Gun. It's gonna be a gun. Instead, he pulls out a pamphlet and then goes, "But you know, there's always one thing we can trust, right? The Lord. Do you believe in God?" and then proceeded to try and convert me for the remainder of the ride. Turned out to be harmless, but in the moment, that random religious cab driver scared the absolute crap out of me. In 2016, I hiked from New Jersey to Virginia on the Appalachian Trail. I was on the part of the trail known as the roller coaster, not far from Harper's Ferry. I hit heavy rain. The trail became a stream and all my rain gear decided to give out. Everything I had was soaked. I had to spend the next day waiting for my gear to dry out at the nearest shelter. Around noon, I can see someone walking intersecting to the trail. I can tell he's not a hiker, being that he had no bag and was wearing jeans. He told me his name was Steve. He starts by asking if I know Chris or Jim. Being that no one uses regular names on the trail, there would be no way to identify them, even if they were real people. Steve said he walked from DC, 80 miles, and was told to meet Chris and Jim for further instructions. He said he had information, and the NSA was after him. I figured the guy was having a mental break and felt sorry I couldn't help him. Not too far off was a free hiker hostel, maybe a 4-hour walk. The hostel was just a shelter that was enclosed with a wood-burning stove, but next to it was a house that a ridge runner, does trail maintenance, lived at. I directed him towards that. After all my stuff dried, I headed to the hostel and got there early evening. As I'm walking up, I can see the ridge runner and Steve arguing. The ridge runner is yelling at Steve, telling him to take a trail to a road and to leave this area. If he did not, the ridge runner would call the police for trespassing. At the shelter, I saw familiar people who filled me in on what happened. At every shelter is a trail log. The log is a journal that keeps track of people who pass through and notes about what's happening on the trail. It is also a way to pass messages to people you might know behind you. Steve got a hold of the log and started looking for a message for him. He thought he had to decode the messages to find instructions for him. Steve started to write random things and crossing things out through the log. This action made people angry who were already wary of Steve because of appearance of not being a fellow hiker. Steve also argued with a few people before this and made a fire to burn some paper that he was carrying. They notified the ridge runner. People were pretty upset about Steve, so I never told them that I ran into him previously. I never saw Steve again, and still think that he was a person with mental issues having an episode. However, I do imagine the scenario where he was telling the truth and what his story was. I was backpacking my way through Asia in the early 2000s and spent quite a bit of time in Hong Kong. Hong Kong Island is pretty hilly to say the least. I found myself near a fancy hotel near Central/Admiralty. Can't remember which hotel exactly. That was on a higher plane than where I wanted to go and didn't see an easy way to get down. I spotted an entrance to a set of stairs that I thought could exit to the street below. These weren't outdoor stairs. They led underground. In retrospect, probably the fire exit for the hotel. The door was unlocked and I just went in. Each floor had a door that I assumed led into the hotel or would exit to the street. I found each one was locked. I probably should have just left as soon as I saw the first one was locked. But I was young and dumber, and thought that eventually there would be a door out to the street below. So I kept going down this extremely dark stairwell trying to open each door. When I finally reached the bottom, I noticed a bunch of shapes in the darkness, mostly rags and boxes. Then I noticed movement. There were maybe 5 to 6 men down there all sprawled out, not talking or anything. But they noticed me, and at least one was staring at me. The whites of his eyes reflected what little bit of light was down there. They were definitely high. I can only assume that I had barged my way into some sort of heroin den. I just sort of stood there looking at them and they were looking at me, no one saying anything. I slowly backed up out of their sight and then rushed all the way back up. maybe 5 floors or so. Maybe it's not too creepy compared to other stories, but I was definitely freaked out for a while. It was totally dark, and no one knew that I was down there. Of course, maybe they were equally freaked out that someone had barged into their secret spot. I'm American, and I lived in Malaysia for several years toward the tail end of high school. I have 2 stories. 1. I traveled to Vietnam with my sister and father. One of the places we visited was an area of concentrated tunnels, upkept from the Vietnam War era. We had the option of touring some of the tunnels and jumped at the chance. We started out in a small room with holes at eye level that just cleared the Earth's surface, perfect for shooting at the feet of the enemy. We were then led down a tunnel that required us to stoop, seeing as we were significantly taller than our Vietnamese guide. We came to another small room. Our guide told us that one tunnel led up and out. The other led to what was once a weapons cache. My sister and I really wanted to see that room, but my dad had enough and asked to be let out. To this day, I have no idea what my thought process was, but I decided to lead my sister to the next room. I might have been under the impression that there was a second guide there waiting for us. Unsurprisingly, it got dark. The guide had the flashlight, and the hanging lamp from the previous room got harder to see by. I kept thinking, it has to just be a few feet further. Instead, the tunnel got shorter and shorter until we were basically crawling forwards in the dark, single file. I remember looking back and realizing the tunnel must have curved or something because the lamplight was gone. There wasn't enough space to turn around, so I just kept going. I felt horrible, like I had just condemned my sister and I to dying in the dark, crushed by the ever-shrinking tunnel. Eventually, the floor in front of me ended. Thinking back, we had probably reached the weapon cache room and only needed to drop a couple of feet to stand. But in the dark, I only felt empty air in front of me. I'm pretty sure that moment is the moment that I developed a fear of really wide open spaces, because to this day, I can imagine some giant maw inches from my flailing arm looking for purchase. I told my sister that we'd have to crawl backwards, and if that middle schooler wasn't an absolute trooper about the whole thing. Unfortunately, we must have taken a turn without realizing it, because we started down there blind, lost, crawling in the dirt for what I would later learn was about an hour. The guide eventually found us, and I've never been happier to see a flashlight. My second story. I had early morning conditioning for track, so I opted to walk the couple of miles to school rather than wake up my dad. I couldn't legally get a driver's license and frankly didn't want to drive in that hellscape. So I'm walking in the twilight hour, alone, a young white boy in my private school uniform. Easy prey for 2 dudes that brandished knives and demanded that I pay them. Being dumb and young, I drop my brag and sprint the remaining mile to school. Their moped was far enough away that I lost them before they got moving, thank God. If that happened to me now, I'd just cough up the money they wanted. No doubt the $30 equivalent in their money was worth walking away unscathed. I've learned to carry 2 wallets when traveling in less than scrupulous areas. One for all my important cards and IDs, and one that's empty except for some cash. I travel alone a lot, and have been super fortunate to have minimal creepy encounters, but this one still makes my spine tingle. I was in London for 6 days on a stopover on my way back to Canada from 6 weeks in South Africa. I've been working in South Africa, very long but rewarding days, so the London stop was touristy and lazy, just a nice reset before I got back home to Canada. There was a pub about a block or 2 from the hostel that I was staying in that I ate at every night. It was cheap, cozy, and never too crowded, so I'd bring a book, order a pint, and eat supper. I had chatted with the waitress a couple of nights in a row. She was very kind, my age, and we exchanged a few stories, and she knew from chatting that I was traveling alone and staying in a hostel nearby. Well, on day 4, I followed my usual route from the hostel to pub and greeted the waitress. She said hello and quickly brought over a drink menu. Not 30 seconds after I'd sat down, a man walked in and sat a few tables away. She motioned to him and mumbled, "Do you know him?" I kind of laughed and said definitely not. I don't know anyone in London. She nodded and positioned herself between myself and the man and said quietly, "He got off a bench and followed you from the street over. I don't like the look of him and I just thought I'd ask. Might be nothing, but thought I'd mention it." I thanked her and said that I'm sure it's just a coincidence. She shrugged and took my order, and the evening proceeded as usual. The man also ordered a drink but no food. I stayed for over 2 hours, reading, eating, and drinking. The pub was quiet. A few other people or groups came and went, but the man stayed. He drank the 1 pint and refused top-ups. The waitress kept a close eye on him, and me, and stopped over to chat several times between refills, but didn't bring him up again. When I was finishing my last drink and preparing to leave, I glanced over at him and noticed that he looked on the edge of his seat, like he was preparing to leave too. I hadn't really thought much of it till then, but my stomach suddenly knotted up. It was dark and it was drizzly, and I had a short but lonesome walk back to my hostel. I suddenly felt distinctly unsafe. I summoned the waitress over to pay and asked her if she'd mind calling me a taxi as well. She nodded vigorously, and I knew she thought this was a good idea. The taxi showed up, and I thanked the waitress and left. I hopped in the taxi, and I swear that old man thought I was so dumb for needing a drive for such a short distance. But whatever. I felt so much safer. I went back the next evening, as it would be my last night in London, and I wanted to say goodbye and thank the waitress for her hospitality, friendship, and ultimately looking out for me. When I arrived, she ran over and said she was so glad that I'd called a cab. I guess right after I left, the man left too, seeming really agitated. He'd not even asked for a bill, just left money on the table and stormed out. She felt very confident he'd seen me walking alone, followed me in and was planning to approach me when I left. What would have happened then, neither her nor I really wanted to think about. I had a lovely last night at the pub, and we even shared some small glasses of wine together for a quick cheers before I left. I don't walk places alone at night anymore, even if it's just a short distance. This story isn't creepy in the sense that I was really scared, but it's more creepy in the sense that I just wanted this guy to get away from me. I was taking a red-eye from Miami to Buenos Aires. It's a pretty long flight. Like an idiot, I thought that a middle seat in the front of the plane would be more desirable than a window/aisle seat at the back of the plane. It isn't. So there I was, in the middle seat of the plane with older gentlemen on both sides of me. The unspoken rules of the airplane are as follows. The aisle seat can extend their legs into the aisle. The window seat can lean against the side of the plane, and the middle seat gets both armrests. Those are the rules. I've been traveling for work for a long time, and those are just the rules. The guy in the window seat must not have known the rules, because he kept trying to push my arm off his armrest. I fought him for a little while, but eventually let him have the armrest and just tried to get some sleep. Things neither escalated nor de-escalated until about 30 minutes after we had taken off. A foul stench reached my nose, and I couldn't immediately identify its source. I briefly inspected my surroundings and discovered that my window seat neighbor had removed his shoes. Exposed and naked to the world, his greasy toes wiggled and shamelessly exuded an aroma that was a mix of sulfur, sausage gravy, and mold. To my absolute shock, he lifted his foot nearest me, slid it out from under the space under the seat in front of him, and placed it in the adjacent space under the seat in front of me, the space where my feet were actively occupying. In the following moments, I realized that I had a decision to make as to the severity of the conflict that I would instigate. I had immediately decided that conflict would be unavoidable, with the brashness of my rude neighbor's most recent offense. There was a scale of following actions that I could have taken. I could have nudged his leg and treated the scenario like an honest mistake, which it was not. I could have gone straight to yelling, which would have been uncomfortable in the early stages of a red-eye flight. I opted for a multi-step approach. First, I accidentally stepped on his toes with my heel. He responded to this by pulling his leg up, clearly looking to readjust and place it back near where it was. I caught his knee as he pulled his leg up and firmly guided it back to the space that he was allotted. No eye contact was made, but he grunted in displeasure of my actions. In anticipation of a retort, I remained steady to defend what little territory American Airlines had loaned me for the evening. As in most scenarios regarding any scale of conflict, my heart beat quickly, and my adrenaline surged for triple, maybe even quadruple the amount of time that the situation actually took place. After the incident, he appeared to abandon his invasion and spent the remainder of the flight impersonating a hibernating grizzly bear with sleep apnea. Between the adrenaline that remained in my system and his unnaturally loud throaty snores, very little sleep was had. I once flew into Liberia, Costa Rica, and rented a car to drive down the Pacific coast. This was my first time to Costa Rica, and I figured I could use the GPS on my phone to navigate my way. After landing and picking up a rental vehicle, I immediately headed west to Del Coco Beach, because I wanted to check out the ocean. I checked out the scene and picked up some party favors, then headed south. All of the major highways and even some not-so-major roads were showing up on my phone, and I really wanted to stick as close to the ocean as I could, hoping for some cool little villages and beaches. This was working pretty well for a while, and I was just following old Google having a ball of a time in my little 4x4. Then it started to get dark, and the road started to get a little rough. I decided to press on, because I had been on this particular road for quite some time, and my GPS was telling me that I was only about 45 minutes from my destination. I'm driving along a road that requires me to sometimes cross small creeks and maneuver around and through some large ditches, or missing pieces of road. The road was dirt at this point. Then all of a sudden, the road seems to go into a gated, but open field with a long, about 50-meter trench that was full of water and mud. I'm familiar with 4x4 vehicles and how to drive through some difficult terrain, but this had me sketched out a bit. But thinking about how far back I would have to backtrack, I decided to go for it. I backed up a bit to get some momentum going and made sure that I was in 4-wheel drive. Then I gunned it and kept it pegged through this massive mud hole and just barely made it out on the other side. I stopped for a moment to gather myself, and all of a sudden, lights from what seemed to be another vehicle appear. At this point, I was a bit relieved because I had not seen another vehicle for hours. I figure it's just someone using the road coming from where I'm headed. This was not the case. A giant truck pulls up next to me and rolls down their window. It was an older, rough, scary-looking Tico. I say hello, and he doesn't say a word. He just sits there, staring down at me with murderous eyes, puts his thumb to his neck, and gives me the old, "I'm gonna slice your throat" gesture. This was probably the most scared that I have ever been in my life, and still is to this day. I legit threw it in reverse and flipped that little Suzuki around like some action movie. I slammed into the mud hole and thought that I was going to blow the engine. I was hammering it so hard. I made it through the trench and checked my rear view mirror. He's following me, and not in a slow, just make sure that I leave kind of way. More like a, I'm gonna catch you and kill you kind of way. I almost wrecked a few times trying to gain distance between him and I was able to do so. I came across a sign after about an hour. I didn't see this on the way in, showing me the way to civilization, and I quickly took that turn. I got to the highway and proceeded on with my journey. I still wonder what the heck was going on in that weird little piece of Costa Rican jungle. I'm assuming something to do with cocaine, but who knows. I had a great trip after that and made sure that I had actual maps going forward. While this was extremely creepy, it was the most exciting life experience I have had and would not trade it for anything. I was a volunteer working at a camp in Vilipohe, Albania. One night, my friends and I decided to go to some beach bars to party. We bar hopped a little and eventually ended up in one a bit far from the camp, a bit further from the coast, behind a big forest. When 2 a.m. hit the clock, I felt tired, so I decided to go back to the camp. No one else was willing to do so, so I ended up walking alone. I decided to take a shortcut through the forest. It was pitch dark, so I used my flashlight on my phone. I illuminated the path and then I saw it. It was a body. I startled and started moving the light slowly, only to reveal 10 more bodies lying on the ground. Fortunately, all of those bodies were alive, just sleeping. It turned out the forest was full of homeless gypsies who were just living there. I was relieved that no one was dead, but also a bit scared of being robbed. Obviously, I don't mean to be racist. Most of those guys are fine and nice, but also poor and unfortunate. They were usually making a living by playing music on nearby beaches. However, at the same time, I saw their children pickpocketing the tourists. But the night got even scarier. When I left the forest safely, I started walking on the promenade. I started looking at the stairs as the night sky in Vilipohe is simply gorgeous. I was passing a lot of rabid dogs on the way. I didn't think much of it at the moment, because they were just scavenging near the rubbish bins and piles and just kept walking. Suddenly, I started feeling uneasy. Something wasn't right. I turned around, and wouldn't you know it, the dogs were following me. The pack was getting larger and larger, and it wasn't a funny parade with cute puppies. They started forming an open circle formation, just like hunting wolves in the movies. I immediately started walking a bit faster, looking around for any large stick to defend myself. The dogs accelerated their pace as well. Encouraged by their numbers, some of them started growling. Then I heard loud barking and tapping. I quickly turned around and saw one of the dogs charging me, with about 10 to 15 dogs walking behind it quietly or growling. I did the only thing I could think of, which was shouting and stomping aggressively. That immediately discouraged the pack. All the 10 to 15 dogs stopped and looked at me quietly, still remaining in the circle formation. The charging one retreated and barked even louder, probably to cover its lack of courage. I slowly turned my back and started walking, but then the dog charged me again, and again I shouted and tried to look aggressive. This worked again, and became a routine for the rest of my way back to the camp, which was fortunately just 10 more minutes. Needless to say, I was scared to death that I was going to be eaten, or at least severely bitten by a pack of wild dogs. But thank God, nothing happened. Thank you so much for listening to all of the stories in this video. I hope you enjoyed them. I also hope that you enjoy the extra rain at the end of this video. Please make sure to check out our sponsor, Aura Health, linked in the description down below, as well as our guest reader, Mr. Sandman. Have an excellent night, everybody. Sleep well, and I'll read to you in the next video.